You were taught to believe that power is seized by the bold, that dominance is won by those who refuse to bend, that the world bows only to the unshakable. You were fed the myth of the conqueror, the untouchable, the supreme, the one who stands above the petty concerns of humility. And so, you built yourself into something hard, something unyielding, something that mistakes arrogance for strength. But here is the truth you were never told. The moment you believe yourself invincible is the moment you begin your unraveling. Machiavelli, the great dissector of power, knew this better than anyone. In The Prince, he did not glorify the tyrant who rules through fear alone, nor did he celebrate the ruler who mistakes cruelty for control. Instead, he revealed the delicate, often invisible line between authority and self-destruction. Arrogance, that intoxicating illusion of superiority, is not a weapon, it is a trap. It is the slow poison that weakens the foundations of even the most formidable empires. The unseen crack in the armor that invites the dagger's thrust. Think of the last time you witnessed someone who radiated absolute certainty, who carried themselves as though the world owed them reverence. Did you feel admiration? Or did you sense, beneath the surface, something brittle, something waiting to shatter? There is a reason why the most enduring rulers in history were not the loudest, nor the most brazen, but those who understood the weight of perception, the necessity of restraint, the art of appearing strong without declaring it. Arrogance is not power. It is the caricature of power, the performance that fools even the performer. Machiavelli's insights cut deeper than mere political strategy. They expose a fundamental law of human nature. The more you insist on your own greatness, the more you provoke the universe to humble you. The arrogant ruler believes his subjects obey out of awe, when in truth, they obey out of necessity. And necessity is a thread that snaps when pulled too tight. The moment a leader forgets that power is a dance, not a decree, is the moment the dance turns against him. Consider the fate of Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's own cautionary tale. Here was a man of ruthless ambition, a prince who wielded fear like a blade, who believed his will alone could shape reality. And yet, his empire crumbled not from external conquest, but from the very arrogance that once fueled his rise. He thought himself the master of fate, until fate proved him a fool. This is the paradox of power. Those who grasp too tightly lose it fastest. The ruler who demands love instead of loyalty, who mistakes fear for respect, who cannot see the delicate balance between strength and strategy, he is already falling, even if he does not yet feel the ground beneath him cracking. So ask yourself, where in your own life have you confused arrogance for control? Where have you mistaken the performance of power for the substance of it? Because the lesson Machiavelli imparts is not just for princes and kings. It is for anyone who has ever stood at the helm of anything and felt the seductive whisper of invincibility. The moment you believe you are above the game is the moment you lose it. Power, in its truest form, is a shadow game played in the space between perception and reality. Machiavelli, that cunning architect of political realism, understood this better than most when he peeled back the layers of rulership in The Prince. What emerges is not a celebration of brute force or unchecked dominance, but rather a chilling revelation. Arrogance is not the hallmark of power. It is its slow-acting poison. The ruler who mistakes swagger for strength, who confuses contempt for control, has already begun the long march toward his own undoing. There exists a fundamental tension at the heart of sustainable authority, one that the arrogant fail to grasp. True power does not announce itself with thunder. It moves like a whisper, shaping outcomes long before force is ever necessary. The moment a leader begins to believe his own myth, that his will alone dictates reality, is the moment he severs himself from the very mechanisms that sustain influence. Machiavelli's prince must be feared, yes, but never so openly despised that his subjects are pushed past obedience into rebellion. The arrogant ruler, drunk on his own supremacy, cannot see the line between respect and resentment until it is too late. Consider the nature of control. The weak ruler believes it is maintained through sheer displays of dominance, through grand gestures of superiority. But Machiavelli reveals the deeper truth. Power is preserved not by the fist, but by the careful cultivation of necessity. People obey not because they are awed, but because they see no better alternative. The arrogant prince, however, mistakes forced compliance for genuine authority. He believes his subjects follow out of reverence, when in truth they follow only until the moment his grip shows weakness. And weakness always comes, because arrogance blinds a man to his own vulnerabilities. Loyalty, too, is a currency that arrogance devalues without realizing it. The ruler who demands fealty as his birthright, who surrounds himself with flatterers and sycophants, has already hollowed out his own foundation. Machiavelli warns that the wise prince must always keep his ear to the ground, must hear the murmurs before they become roars. But the arrogant ruler silences dissent, believing criticism to be beneath him. He forgets that the courtier who praises him today may plot against him tomorrow, and by the time he learns this lesson, the knives are already at his back. Perhaps the most dangerous illusion of arrogance is its warping of time. The truly powerful understand that no reign is eternal, that fortunes will turn for all men. They prepare for decline even at the height of their strength. But the arrogant ruler acts as though his dominance is a law of nature. He does not fortify his position because he cannot conceive of losing it. He does not cultivate true allies because he believes he needs none. And when the winds of fate shift, as they always do, he is left exposed, bewildered by the suddenness of his fall, never realizing that his downfall began the moment he stopped questioning his own invincibility. The lesson here is not merely political. It is existential. In our own lives, how often do we mistake bluster for capability? How often do we dismiss feedback as ignorance, or confuse deference for earned respect? Machiavelli's warning echoes across centuries. The higher you place yourself above others, the farther you have to fall. And the ground, when it comes, is always harder than expected. The whispers of history carry a truth that transcends time. The story of power is always, inevitably, the story of its unraveling. Machiavelli's observations on arrogance find their deepest resonance not in political theory alone, but in the archetypal patterns that have shaped human destinies since the first kingdoms rose from the dust. These are not mere historical footnotes but living parables, each one a mirror held up to our own relationship with power and its intoxicating illusions. Consider the myth of Icarus, that eternal warning written across the sky. His waxen wings, crafted by his father's wisdom, carried him toward the sun until the heat of his own ambition melted them away. The parallels to Machiavellian wisdom are uncanny, the careful balance between aspiration and restraint, the necessity of heeding experienced counsel, the fatal consequences of soaring too high on the thermals of one's own self-regard. Like the arrogant ruler who believes himself beyond reproach, Icarus mistook his temporary elevation for permanent mastery over the elements themselves. The fall was not an accident of fate but the inevitable conclusion of his disregard for natural limits. The biblical tale of King Nebuchadnezzar offers another profound allegory. Here was a ruler of such immense power that he built an empire to rival the gods themselves, only to be humbled to the point of grazing like an ox in the fields. His 7 years of bestial existence symbolize the fundamental truth that arrogance doesn't merely damage a ruler's standing, it erodes his very humanity. Machiavelli's warning echoes through this ancient story. The leader who loses touch with his own limitations loses touch with reality itself. The golden statue Nebuchadnezzar erected of himself becomes the perfect metaphor for the brittle monument of ego, impressive from a distance, but hollow at its core and vulnerable to any challenge. In Eastern philosophy, the concept of the mandate of heaven presents a different but equally illuminating perspective. Chinese dynasties rose and fell based on the perceived virtue of their rulers, with natural disasters and popular uprisings seen as signs that heaven had withdrawn its favor. This mirrors Machiavelli's insight that true power depends on maintaining the perception of legitimacy. The arrogant ruler who believes his position is divinely ordained rather than carefully maintained makes the same fatal error as the emperor who ignores the starving peasants. He fails to understand that power flows upward from the consent of the governed, not downward from the heavens. Shakespeare's tragic heroes provide perhaps the most human expressions of this timeless dynamic. From Coriolanus, whose contempt for the common people destroys him, to Richard III, whose ruthless ambition ultimately isolates him from all potential allies. These characters embody Machiavelli's principles in their purest form. What makes them tragic rather than merely villainous is their fundamental blindness to their own flaws, the characteristic that transforms their considerable talents into instruments of their own destruction. The audience watches with grim fascination as each brilliant but arrogant leader meticulously constructs the scaffolding of their own downfall, believing until the final moment that they are building a throne rather than a gallows. These narratives coalesce into a unified warning that transcends culture and epoch. The mechanisms may differ. Sometimes it's the rebellion of overlooked subordinates. Sometimes the miscalculation of one's true strength. Sometimes simply the accumulation of small resentments that eventually become an avalanche. But the pattern remains disturbingly consistent. The ruler who cannot distinguish between genuine respect and fearful compliance, who mistakes his temporary advantage for permanent superiority, who believes his own propaganda. This ruler has already begun writing the final act of his tragedy, even as he imagines himself at the height of his powers. The lessons Machiavelli etched into parchment centuries ago did not fade with the Medicis or the fall of Renaissance city-states. They merely took new forms, adapting to the contours of our modern age. The executive who mistakes his boardroom dominance for genuine leadership. The politician who believes his rhetoric more than his advisors. The influencer who confuses viral fame for lasting influence. All are playing out the same ancient drama of hubris and decline, just on different stages. The mechanisms of power have evolved, but the human weaknesses that undermine it remain unchanged. Consider the corporate titan who surrounds himself with yes-men, who dismisses market warnings as the complaints of the unimaginative, who interprets early success as proof of his own infallibility. His fate is already written in the quarterly reports he doesn't read carefully, in the employee surveys he dismisses as irrelevant, in the quiet departures of talented subordinates who grow tired of being unheard. Modern business law is filled with these fallen giants, once dominant companies that collapsed not because they were outmaneuvered, but because they stopped questioning their own assumptions. The same arrogance that toppled kings now drains billion-dollar valuations, proving that the marketplace, like the medieval court, has little patience for those who mistake momentum for mastery. In politics, the pattern repeats with eerie precision. The leader who begins to believe his press clippings, who treats governance as an extension of his ego rather than a stewardship of public trust, inevitably makes the fatal error: he stops listening. Policies become personal crusades rather than pragmatic solutions. Critics are framed as enemies rather than correctives. Loyalty is demanded as tribute rather than earned through competence. Machiavelli's warning echoes here with special clarity. The moment a ruler confuses his own interests with those of the state is the moment his judgment becomes compromised. Modern democracies and autocracies alike have seen their share of such figures, many of whom were shocked to discover that their perceived invincibility was just a collective suspension of disbelief, easily revoked. Even in our personal lives, these dynamics play out in subtler but no less consequential ways. The manager who bullies rather than inspires, the partner who dominates rather than collaborates, the friend who monologues rather than converses, all are enacting miniature versions of the same destructive pattern. They may not rule nations or corporations, but they wield influence in their own spheres, and their arrogance serves the same corrosive function. People tolerate such behavior only until they don't have to, and the moment an alternative presents itself, a better job, a kinder relationship, a more reciprocal friendship, the illusion of their authority crumbles. The antidote, as Machiavelli implied, is not false humility or weakness, but a clear-eyed understanding of power's true nature. Real strength lies in knowing what you don't know, in cultivating advisors who will tell you hard truths, in recognizing that control is never absolute, only negotiated, day by day, through a combination of respect, pragmatism, and foresight. The leader who lasts is the one who stays paranoid in times of peace, who treats every ally as a future potential challenger, who understands that today's victory can plant the seeds of tomorrow's defeat if handled carelessly. As we stand in an era where power is more diffused than ever, where social media can elevate or topple institutions overnight, where public perception shifts like sand, Machiavelli's insights feel less like historical artifacts and more like survival manuals. The principles haven't changed. Only the battlefield has. The arrogant still fall. Only now their stumbles are live-tweeted. The wise still endure, but their advantage lies in recognizing that wisdom isn't a possession. It's a practice. one that requires constant vigilance against the seductive lie of one's own superiority. Power tests character more than it builds it. The question Machiavelli leaves us with isn't merely how to gain influence, but what we become once we have it. Will we use it wisely, with an awareness of its fragility, or will we succumb to the intoxication of dominance, mistaking the fear we inspire for the respect we crave? History's greatest leaders, those who shaped eras without being destroyed by them, understood that true authority isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but the one that doesn't need to raise itself to be heard. The call here is not to reject power, but to wield it with eyes wide open, to recognize that every act of arrogance is a debt taken out against one's future, and that the interest always comes due, whether in politics, business, or personal relationships. The same choice presents itself again and again. Build on the unstable foundation of ego, or the steady ground of earned legitimacy. One path leads to temporary dominance followed by inevitable collapse, the other to enduring influence. The difference between them isn't strength or intelligence, but something far simpler: the humility to remember that no one is ever as invincible as they feel in their strongest moment.